Hello and welcome to the Wachovia Entrepreneurial Speaker Series. My name is Jonathan Rowe. I'm the director of the UNCW Entrepreneurship Center, and we are very fortunate to have Grace Ueng with us today, founder and CEO of Savvy Marketing Group, and just an incredible diverse background, not only with corporations, education, startups, and now consulting and working with so many different clients. So there's so many different places for us to start. But let's maybe go back a little bit in time and find out, and I think there's maybe two parts to this question, but if we go back maybe 3 or 4 years ago, earlier, what drives you? Because there's something that people have referred to as grace speed. And tell us a little bit about grace speed and what drives you, what motivates you to do all these amazing things you've done.
Yeah, I felt like recently, I'm a little bit slower now, just after I turned 40 and then literally went downhill.
And we'll come back to that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, now I'm a little bit, yeah. So I don't think of myself as being any different from anybody else, although I have had employees one person that wasn't working out, he said one time, "Oh, I'm not like Superwoman like you are," and I mean, he was a guy also, but I think just usually the people that I surround myself with and do make it to the team that like I work with, they're very much like me, so I don't see myself as any different. I think it's just the people that I end up being around, either the companies that I work with or for when I was in-house, or clients that gravitate to want to work with Savvy Marketing Group. So I don't feel like I'm necessarily ahead of them or have a different speed.
Okay, so let's maybe debate that just a little bit. I mean, so you start out, you do your undergrad at MIT, and then you're accepted into a program where you have 2-year deferred sort of status to the Harvard MBA program. So you're coming into the Harvard MBA program 2 years after you finish MIT as one of the youngest, and you go off and have some incredible corporate experience during that period. Talk a little bit about that and how that shaped your career maybe a little later on as well.
Maybe one reason why I don't think I'm any different, I think I've always been surrounded by people who are pretty brilliant, and I always, like as I was saying earlier today, everyone's always smarter than me or has something, and I'm just trying to keep up with them. So maybe that's what drives me, is that the people around me I aspire to be like and keep up with them, actually. So I think definitely at MIT, my freshman year, I remember looking across the physics lecture hall and thinking, why does that person look so familiar? And I realized, oh wow, she was on the cover of Time magazine. She was the Westinghouse Talent Search winner, and that now I know that doesn't exist anymore, but for some of you, you may remember, I think it's now the Siemens competition. And actually some of the kids from North Carolina School of Science and Math have placed highly in that. But I was like, what am I doing here? So I think just trying to keep up with some of the bright minds around me has probably given me that drive.
Do you consider yourself a competitive person?
Gosh, not really. Like in my wannabe endurance career, I'm like, just want to be, it's not a career at all. I couldn't make money at all from it. But I just want to be like middle of the pack. I definitely don't want to be last, so that's not competitive, is it?
Well, that's okay. So let's maybe jump into that, because I think we're probably going to bounce around a little bit. But there was a pretty major event that occurred in your life not too recently, and you mentioned turning the very wise age that you turned. And could you talk a little bit about maybe what happened for some of those who are watching or here who don't know about that, and how it influenced you and really has affected you?
Sure. I'm pretty bad at taking vacation, and that's one of my goals, hopefully maybe in the new year, to be better at taking time off. So for my 40th birthday, I said, well, turning 40 only happens once, so I think I should treat myself to something. And so I treated myself to a cycling tour in the Bay Area in Sonoma in the wine country. And I don't remember much of the event because on this third day of the tour, 2 days shy of my 40th birthday, I do remember we had a really rigorous ride the day before, and it was on Sonoma Mountain Road, and I was at the top, and one of the guides, one of our 2 guides was a world-class triathlete. He said, "Are you okay?" And I was actually really tired. I said, "I'm fine." And so he sped ahead, and I don't remember what happened after that. So I literally went downhill at 2 days shy of my 40th. I was in the ICU on my 40th birthday. And that whole experience forced me to take some downtime, because I broke my neck. And the most scary thing about it was I had a head injury. So I lost my short-term memory and my long-term memory came back. And that created a lot of interesting things, such as my interest in China and my babbling in Chinese to people who never heard me speak in Chinese. And those are my first words were in Chinese to my mom. I told her gang gang, which means dry, because she was trying to change my diaper, and I was telling her not to waste the diaper. So yeah, it was an amazing, amazing event that all my different neuro specialists were all telling me you cannot work. And I'm not the type who can't work. So it forced me to have time on my back to think about life.
And you've mentioned some of the people that you've had in your life, both on the professional and personal side, and how important were they during that period? Because you came back from a lot fairly quickly.
Yeah, there were so many people who helped out. My parents, who were in their mid-70s at the time, they came to live with me to take care of me. And since then, they actually now are 80-ish, and I've moved them to a retirement community in Chapel Hill. So they wouldn't be able to do that again, but it just happened at that time. They became very, very useful. They came to take care of their 40-something-year-old daughter. So it's kind of a neat opportunity for them. So that was definitely a touching family moment. My clients, so many of them came to my home. I couldn't drive. I had to relearn how to drive once I started recovering, got the neck brace off. They came to pick me up, to take me out to lunch. And then one client that I was in the middle of doing work for, I was so determined to finish a deadline for them. And of course, they were like, just get well. But I remember I was very determined to do it. And my dad drove me to that client presentation. Anyway, it was something that I wanted to get done for them.
And you did it?
Yeah. And since then they've had a successful exit. A really neat entrepreneur that I worked with for a number of years.
So let's now back up a little bit and let's talk about some of the companies you were involved in, a number of startups, and if we went back further, you spent some time in sort of in the corporate world with a number of companies, and were also over in Hong Kong for a while. Let's talk a little about the startup experience and joining companies, especially on the marketing side. What did you bring when you stepped into these companies like OpenSite and MEC, which became the Learning Network? What did you bring when you walked in and they said, okay, you're literally being handed the keys to the marketing piece? How do you approach that? Where did you start?
Well, it's interesting. When Kip hired me, like on the spot, like I was mentioning earlier today, we had lunch and he decided very quickly. Okay.
And just for everyone, Kip is?
Kip Fry was the CEO of OpenSite Technologies that I know some of you're familiar with him. And I told him, I said, well, I haven't quite done this before. He said, you will figure it out. And he's told me later, Grace, you will things to happen. I was like, oh, okay. Because he was just making observations of how I behave just so I could be self-aware. And I've heard a CEO say recently, it's the will, not the skill. I mean, I think I had some of the skills, but sometimes I've been in situations I've never been in before. And I think entrepreneurs, early stage companies, when some things aren't yet defined, you do have to will things to happen.
And what are there some examples of things that you willed to happen from the marketing?
Yeah, like I hadn't done, that was my first foray into business-to-business software, because I had done business-to-consumer software, and before that I was in classical CPG companies. And I told Kip, I said, well, I haven't done the B2B enterprise thing. He said, you'll figure it out. And so I think one thing that I do is, and I surround myself with people who are also the same way, is you need to be very resourceful. And then it's also a way of thinking and approaching a problem. And I think some of the classroom training, perhaps in business school, helped me do that. Okay. And also in college at MIT, it's a way of thinking and approaching problems.
What is it? Is there a way to pull that out and sort of lay it out for us who might be thinking, wow, I want some of that ability to will things to happen like that?
I guess every problem has some solution. You just have to be creative about getting there. So,
how important is market research play a role in some of that?
Yeah, it's interesting. So when I was at the big companies, my eyes would just glaze over, poring over mounds and mounds of market research data, because you literally have hundreds of thousands of dollars to conduct and field quantitative research. But I would go through it and I learned that methodology. So when I went to the smaller companies, they would say, oh, we don't have time to do research, we don't have to. But it was interesting. I remember sometimes I said, no, we have to think through this a little bit. We need to step back and make sure that we're not wasting our time. And I remember, like Kip, for instance, appreciated, and he told me, he said, whatever you do, document it. Because he was fast forwarding, thinking into due diligence for a future deal, that it was bound and pretty. Because that's all he said to me. He said, I just trust you, just document it and bind it. And he was sort of the art of the deal guy, so I just trusted him. And he trusted me that I needed to do the amount of research that was appropriate for the decision that we were going to make. And that we were in a very, very fast-growing space, creating a new category. So it wasn't like you had a lot of research to look through. There wasn't a lot of secondary research available on what we were doing because we were creating it.
Right.
And so some things that work in consumer packaged goods, like focus groups, work there. But sometimes in emerging technologies, it's hard to get a consumer or a business decision maker to articulate even what you're going to do. So there's the time and place for research in different methodologies that may work better in larger, more established companies or categories.
So in those instances, do you have to rely more internally on what the organization is doing and what the product and service and what you think the market might need?
You have to do a combination of looking at what's out there in the marketplace. If it's an emerging technology, if there's no competition, there's a problem because why isn't anyone else doing it? If you're that early, you're the first, wow. But there's probably going to be a few other people trying to do what you're doing if it really has a meaningful reason for being. So you need to think stealthily and carefully about how you're going to access that data through friends, through doing secret shopping, doing different things. And then, so you used, I call it informed gut. So you don't have a lot of data points to connect, but you try to find some data points to connect, and then you have to trust your gut sometimes. You have to create an informed gut.
And when you think of all the stakeholders that are sort of, while you're that informed gut, are sort of swirling around, and you've got, obviously you're part of the leadership team, and this company was, with Kip, was that the Learning Network?
That was OpenSite.
That was OpenSite, sorry. So you've got the executive team you're working with, you've got investors, obviously you've got people working for you and under you. How do you balance all those stakeholders with sort of also this gut sort of feeling that you've got, that you're putting together?
Yeah.
Do they influence that process at all?
Yeah, I think it works really well, like in that situation where the CEO really trusted his executive team, so we could just run and do it. We didn't have to then go back and like justify it and all that. So there wasn't a lot of internal reporting justification time, which can, especially in larger companies, take up the majority of as larger companies, too much time is spent inwardly focused versus outwardly focused. So there, and the board, I would present to the board, but it wasn't like they were in our face. They trusted us too, I think, because our CEO managed the board very well. They trusted him, which had that trickle-down effect. So it was probably the best of all worlds in that situation, because there's definitely been I've seen other situations where it's the opposite.
Oh, do you? Maybe, have you been through those either directly
either
or
as clients? Yeah. So it's very problematic if your board is trying to be the operating team and they're in there second guessing everything you're doing. And I think it's not uncommon for that to happen. So it's either because it's an investor that's maybe non-trusting, or maybe you have a CEO that's very new, and so the board feels like they have to be in their face, or the investor, they're not mature enough to realize they shouldn't be doing that because it's wasting that person's time.
Yeah.
So much. If you're spending a lot of your time managing the board and then putting together pretty PowerPoints to present to them, instead of looking at the marketplace and saying, who is my competition? And then putting together marketing programs and going out and outreaching to prospects, that's what you should be spending your time doing versus internal reporting and justification things. And
let's sort of follow through the tale of OpenSite then. You had an exit with that, and it's sort of two options, I guess, although one was sort of almost pre-decided, but you had a couple exits.
Yeah, so at that time, we were preparing to go public. And during that process of that, we got an offer from Siebel Systems to buy our company. And at that time, Siebel Systems was the fastest growing software company in the world, maybe, and definitely in the States. So, and they were the CRM company, and they were interested in adding on and increasing their e-commerce suite. and we provided the dynamic commerce element of it. And that's a category that we created because dynamic commerce didn't exist before. And a lot of things worked out well. A lot of the stars were aligned because eBay was just coming into being. They were the horizontal marketplace. We were powering a lot of more B2B applications vertically. So they were justifying our existence and being our part of our marketing machine as far as defining the category. And then we had some really great early customer wins that were great case studies for us. Like GE Plastics, for instance, given that we're here in Wilmington, that might resonate. And so we helped them sell off-spec product. So it was a very practical business application for them.
And this wasn't your first exit with a company. It previously was the Learning Network in Mac,
Yeah,
right?
I had been at Interactive Magic before that, where we had gone public, and that wasn't that successful. So when I got the call from the investors at OpenSite, I needed to move on to another opportunity. And before that, it was with a company called MAC, Minnesota Educational Computing Corporation, that we were bought by SoftKey International, and they also bought the Learning Company, and that was a $1 billion transaction combined, both of us, and we became the Learning Company.
How can you capture that experience at all? I mean, to be acquired at that level, I mean, what's that process like?
Yeah. It's interesting. I was managing, as we mentioned in the earlier session, the Trail series, and I had brought that. Anyone here know the Oregon Trail? Okay, so a number of you have. So that was very successful in schools, and I was brought on to bring their assets, including the Trail series, Oregon Trail, and the other trails. Well, actually, we came up with new trail products to extend the equity into the consumer channel. Because educational software and edutainment was growing at triple digits when I was recruited there. And they had just had their IPO. It was a state agency that became a publicly traded company that was all former school teachers. And their tagline was, "For the love of learning." And everyone there was so wonderful people. They all wanted to reach as many children as possible and get them to learn in a fun way. And so at that point, that was my first foray into smaller companies, because I was going to go back and work at General Mills because we were relocating back to the Twin Cities. But when I got the recruiter call, I read the prospectus, I said, oh my goodness, I've got to do this. And so that was such an amazing opportunity to go in and make a huge difference in a very short amount of time. And it was very exciting to work on such a fast-paced, high-growth category. And there were so many competitors, and they're all converging. And so that M&A activity kind of was just going to happen when you're in such a hot growth space. And so I remember when, I think I was mentioning to a couple people earlier about some of the due diligence meetings with Siebel and what happened. And then I remember when the chairman of the acquiring company, they heard that I might leave, because that's when we were relocating down here to North Carolina. I got a call and said, can you be here tomorrow? And I was in Minneapolis, and the chairman was in Boston and Cambridge. And I asked my boss, I said, I think he means it. She said, yeah, you need to be there. And I remember I couldn't even get a hotel room in Boston. There was some conference going on, and so I ended up sleeping in a conference room. It's a huge conference room. And there was like a pull-out bed from the wall, like a trundle bed or something. But it was this huge conference room with a chandelier and all this with no shower. So I had to go to their exercise facilities that had like a shower, so I could be somewhat, presentable to the chairman. And he sat there, and it was funny. It's the second time this has been asked of me, and he's serving me lunch on China and all this, the chairman and the CEO of the acquiring company, and he took out a pad of paper or a napkin. He said, write the number you want for you to stay. And the first time I was asked that, I was too young to put down a meaningful number. At least this time I put something a little bit bigger. And then, but I knew that I couldn't stay, because I knew for personal reasons. But I stayed long enough, even when we moved here, that I went back and forth to work on the integration, because I wanted the Trail series that meant a lot to me personally and to a lot of kids that I interacted with, for it to live on within the new company. And the same thing with Siebel Systems. One of the sad things is and people know this, when you get acquired, oftentimes your product, there's a high likelihood it won't stay. It won't. That's just the way acquisitions happen, integration by definition is really difficult.
Do you think what you just said has influenced you at all to now be doing savvy marketing and sort of be not necessarily an outsider, but be able to, it's somebody else's company and that you can help in all these directions, but it's not yours per se?
Yeah. What I like is being able to impact a lot of different entities, a lot of companies, and work in a lot of different areas and interact with really amazing people over the last 7 years. So it's the longest I've done anything. So, yeah, but every so often, being a consultant and an outside advisor, you're not in there. But sometimes it's good because you can walk away from it too. So there's pros and cons, definitely pros and cons.
And so let's talk now a little bit. So just maybe briefly, what was the transition for you going from these startups and helping them grow and exiting to now you've created Savvy Marketing Group, and now you're working with all these clients and getting a lot of that sort of diversity. What was there anything there that made that change, or what led you to that?
Yeah, I was a little burnt out and tired from being a VP of marketing and just the same drill happening time and time again. And I took some time off like after the open site thing, and that's when I actually decided instead of making money for investors, I wanted to raise money for a cause, and that's when I ran a marathon for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. A friend of mine was diagnosed with a rare form of lymphoma, and I trained for that. And then, so I took some time off after the last company and worked with a coach and thought through like, how can I leverage all the things I've done in my career to help this community, being Research Triangle Park, because I wanted to stay in that region, and identified that there might be some needs for some of the experiences that I've had over the years to add value as an outsider into companies. And actually, now we serve companies in the Triangle and outside the Triangle, but most of it is in North Carolina.
How difficult is it to go into companies and when you're brought in, I know there's a number of different sort of services and support and things that Savvy Marketing provides, but if we're sort of to take marketing, what are some of the things that you do or that you see in a lot of either growing companies or high growth companies or companies that are established and maybe looking to exit? What are are you seeing any trends around marketing or companies that you go into and you say, okay, I see this consistently?
Yeah, so one thing, just to answer your question about the marketing thing, oftentimes we get asked to step back above that and help with authoring the business plan. Or one client now, we're redoing their business plan. They've been around for a while, but they want to rebrand and they want to step back. And we've done a whole envision future exercise with them off the Jim Collins framework. And it's so different from where they are now that now they're stepping back and they want our help in changing their business model, and actually we're going to help them redo their business plan. So that's before we're going to do a rebranding and then the marketing of it. So just first, because marketing oftentimes is misunderstood, like what is marketing? And so we often get asked to start at a very strategic level for marketing and how it fits in the overall business plan. And in this situation, we're even stepping back and helping rewrite the business plan. So things that are happening especially with the bad economy, we've been asked to do more market assessment and market research because companies have more time to actually step back and assess their situation. Either we've been asked to do audits, marketing audits, because they want to figure out what am I doing wrong. They have time to, maybe either time or they need to figure it out because they don't want to invest any more money unless what they're doing is working. So auditing, and then companies wanting to figure out new lines of business, new channels, and so doing feasibility studies, doing market assessment, and that involves qualitative and quantitative research oftentimes, and then presenting to their board. Many times we get asked at the board level to come in and present our findings on opportunities. So that's been more as of late. There's been fewer entrepreneurs coming wanting help with their business plan, I guess, because of the bad economy. It's more established companies wanting research.
And you'd mentioned a little bit with the business plan example of then, you sort of presented it and then there was the implementation piece. Do you sort of like doing both of them, or do you have any preference, or do you think they go together? You know, often consultants are stereotyped, and not to say this is a consulting scenario, but consultants come in, they provide advice and recommendations and research, and then they go away, and the company doesn't know what to do with it. You know,
Right,
how
right. Yeah, and I started my career, I worked in college and after college for Bain & Company, which probably has that reputation as far as having an army of people come in, do a ton of interviews, and then charge a ton of money, and then walk away or deliver what they already knew, or to justify what they're doing. Yeah, we're definitely a lot more practical than that type of consulting firm. We've been brought in actually after McKinsey, for instance. One actually is a Fortune 500 company. Their BD group hired Savvy to help them look at new technologies, and McKinsey had just come in to do a study, and there were certain technologies they wanted to get into. So we're more practical because we were the post-McKinsey resource, and we were helping them be practical, doing more due diligence, and asking the practical questions to see how it would fit in their portfolio. So we often do entrepreneurship assignments as well. So that would be entrepreneurship. So an established company looking to get into new technology, something new to expand their business.
And you also help in some cases with the funding process. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we haven't done as much of that recently, but so one thing, a few years ago, we were another adjunct faculty at UNC, and I were asked to speak about the topic of marketing for funding and profit, because when you want to go and raise money, you have to market yourself. So in-house, I worked with our CEOs internally creating all the PowerPoints, all the presentations when we were out raising money. So now for clients who have to do the same, it's helping them. Sometimes they say, oh, help us to revise our business plan, but most times it's helping them write it. And then helping them put together their executive summary, which is a very important document in fundraising, and then just helping them package up what they're going to pitch. And that whole process of doing that, it may be important for fundraising, but just as importantly, it forces them to think through their operational plan as well, the details behind the business plan. And definitely, depending on how well connected the people are in the community, we can help make introductions as well.
And let's talk about that a little bit, because obviously you've got a very strong network based on the experiences and the background you've had. Do you have the ability to not necessarily hand select clients, but are you able to pick the ones you want, and as the example you just gave, connect the ones you want if there is funding relationships that might be beneficial?
Yeah, definitely. I love connecting the dots amongst the client ecosystem to make introductions that can be helpful for whatever they want to achieve. So that's definitely something that we like to do. And they may not even be the players may not all be within the client portfolio, maybe just people that I may happen to know. So yeah, if a client, I don't think understands where we can help, then we don't engage. There's been some discussions where I've told them, this isn't what we do, or that isn't where we can add value. And so I definitely wouldn't engage with a company that wasn't a good fit for us, because then at the end of the day, then it won't be good for either party. Yeah. But usually it's through referrals, so it's people that kind of understand what we've done through past clients or people that I've worked with. So they've kind of done that filtering already on both sides.
Well, let's talk a little bit about China, because you mentioned how you've sort of been reopened to China.
I was babbling in Chinese.
Yeah. What are you seeing? Because you've made a few trips over there, you've taught over there, you've really gotten engaged. We talk, and we'll maybe come back to the future of savvy marketing. What do you see happening in China, whether it's around entrepreneurship or links back here?
Yeah. So I taught entrepreneurial marketing in a joint venture with MIT Sloan School. And I've also taught here at UNC, which I've shared with you. And there's such a hunger in China. There's so many new entrepreneurs because, of course, up until not that long ago, marketing didn't even exist. And people weren't free to do a lot of things. And of course, things have changed in the last many years. So in my discovery trips, there's so many needs in China. for learning, for education, and education is of the utmost importance in China. People will give up nearly everything to educate their children, for instance. And so I ended up teaching, because when I went back on one discovery trips, they're like, oh, you're already teaching in your backyard in UNC. There's such a need for MBA type professors here. So I thought, oh, I could add value in that way, since it's already something I'm doing here. And what I find there is people there are so hungry to learn. It was just an amazing experience. So then, of course, as a market opportunity for American companies or Western companies, there's obviously 1.4, well, there's a lot of people in China, there's 1.4 billion people there. So it's a market opportunity for Western companies. And working with China, it's not easy at all. It's a kind of a puzzle for many. And so one thing I realized in my teaching, that people see me as a bridge. So I'm Western trained, but I am Chinese, so I can relate with both groups. My parents are from China. They escaped communist China and came here for graduate school. So I thought, wow, there's a market opportunity. There's companies that want to do business in China, but they don't know how to. And also in my nonprofit work and serving on the board of advisors for the North Carolina Chinese Business Association, I started getting asked a lot of questions about making connections. And then I thought, oh, I could help this as part of my ongoing practice beyond just community involvement. So we've gotten some opportunities to do some neat things, and I think it's just going to snowball from there. And right now I have associates from China who are working with me on furthering our China practice, which is very exciting. And since the firm has been around 7 years, and I have an entrepreneurial spirit by nature, it's adding new service offerings that makes the practice more interesting for me as well.
And you've written quite extensively on some of the things that you've learned on your trips to China. And I think you used the example of Silicon Valley Bank, which is trying to set up a presence over there, but it can't, because of some of the government regulations, it's got to sort of indirectly do this.
Right. There's a lot of infrastructural things that are in their infancy compared to the United States. The legal structure is so different. So, like, you have to just accept the fact that there's a lot of piracy in China, for instance. You can have great market share, but no revenue to show for it. And it's interesting, for one recent client, they just accepted that. They say, look at the positive. It's like free trial. And it's just something, you have to accept it as a way of business. We've helped do market research with Chinese companies because we have the language proficiency on our staff. So, and then interpret the cultural nuances too. Because so much of that, because in China you build guanxi, which is building the relationships. Actually, there's a book called that on Microsoft's entry into China, which is a really interesting read. When I did China entry case studies in my class at Keenan Flagler, I brought the book to show and encourage students to read it.
Do you see, as best you can, Chinese culture as entrepreneurial, or?
Yeah, I do. I think in different parts of China are more entrepreneurial, because China is not just, there's so many differences in the regions, because like for one client this past year, we dissected all the different regions and how different they are, because it's a huge country and the people are not all the same. And so there definitely are differences in different regions on the entrepreneurial spirit. But if you look at it academically, stepping back, you think, oh, well, so many people work for so long and still do for state agencies where they do exactly as they're told. So that would kind of be the opposite of the entrepreneurial spirit. But I think a lot of is pent up. So now it's being unleashed. Like the floodgates are open.
So where do you, if you're, maybe as we're sort of wrapping up, let's take two questions. Where do you see China going forward? Do you see China, a lot of people sometimes think as a Chinese market in terms of an opportunity, the whole market, and realizing that different regions have different needs and different cultures there. But do you see that as the beginning of an opportunity as a country and as an economy for Western
Oh, definitely.
people?
Yeah, I think, and I've seen it, the large global companies, they all have some China strategy. And last year, a Fortune 50 company asked me, I interviewed, they were adding someone to their board, and when it came down to the reasons why they were interested in me as a candidate, definitely their China joint ventures, they realized, wow, because they were looking for a female to add diversity to their board. A 69-year-old female was aging out. And yeah, so they started thinking about, oh, well, and she's also Chinese. So they ended up not adding somebody, but I got in the final two. And it was interesting because I was very shocked that I was asked to interview for that large a board because I have not served on any public boards. So, but then it made me realize that there's a great need by companies to figure out China and have those relationships and bridge building with their JV partners, for instance. Mm-hmm. So that kind of helped me realize what need I could help fill.
And let's now turn that to Savvy Marketing Group. Where do where's your strategy for that over the next 5, even 10 years? Where do you see it going?
Yeah, I think continuing to build some of our new practice areas, like the China, for instance, and then building on what we've already done, and then just figuring out how or if to grow the practice, because that's what I've done for clients and in-house. And I don't know necessarily that's what I want to do with my own firm. So there's all these questions on how to grow, if to grow, who to best serve. And I just want to continue, as I tell my team, it's of utmost importance to deliver high quality work and add value. So that's what I hope to continue doing.
At Grace speed?
At my slower speed.
Well, this has really been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you for joining us for the Wachovia Entrepreneurial Speaker Series.